The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced earlier this year that it is going to use a previously largely ignored legal provision to start examining non-bank financial institutions that pose risk to consumers. And there's been a lot of confusion about what this means for fintech companies in the United States. So today I'm going to explain the process that the CFPB uses to determine which non-bank financial institutions are potentially subject to this examination procedure and what fintech companies can do now in light of the CFPB's announcement. After the 2008 financial crisis, Congress tasked the CFPB with supervising certain categories of non-bank companies. And this included some mortgage loan companies, some private student loan companies, as well as payday lenders. But it also included a rather broad category of institutions that are referred to as companies that the CFPB has a reasonable cause to determine that they pose risk to consumers. And if that sounds a little vague to you, you're right. But the good news is, if you object to the CFPB's position about whether or not you as a fintech company are subject to the CFPB's oversight as someone that poses a risk to consumers, you have a right to object. If you're a fintech company and you're thinking it may make sense to challenge the CFPB's determination that it has the right to examine you as a fintech company, the first thing you want to think about is where in the process you want to assert your challenge. You can challenge the CFPB's ability to do the examination. You can challenge the findings of the CFPB's examination. And finally, you can challenge any effort that the CFPB makes to impose a fine or other penalty on you. Second of all, you want to challenge promptly. If the CFPB makes a preliminary determination that you are subject to oversight because you pose a risk to consumers, you have a right to promptly challenge that determination. And that's critical because often the examination process is more expensive for companies than any penalties that are ultimately imposed by the CFPB. Third, you want to request complaints that have been filed against you. So the CFPB has a complaint portal, and you as a fintech company have a right to access that complaint portal and to review the complaints that have been made against you. It's quite likely that if the CFPB is taking a position that you pose a risk to consumers, that is in response to complaints that the CFPB has received. And so if you seek to challenge the CFPB's determination, it often can be useful to specifically reference the complaints that have been filed with the CFPB. Finally, you want to prepare for the examination itself. And this is something that banks and other financial institutions have been dealing with for years. There are a number of best practices. And if you have reason to think that you're going to be examined and you haven't been through that process, you want to look into those best practices and implement them promptly. There are several things that fintech companies should do now because they're aware that the CFPB is going to start examining certain non-banks that they believe pose a risk to consumers. First of all, you want to read the recent statements that have been made by the CFPB so you understand what their enforcement priorities are now. For example, in March, the CFPB announced that it was going to target discrimination in the offering of consumer financial products. And it appears that this includes disparate impact discrimination. So if you haven't reviewed your product offerings to see if they potentially have a disparate impact on different groups, you should do so now. You also want to review the CFPB's examination manual. That lays out how it will conduct an examination if it determines that it has the right to examine you and is exercising its discretion to do so. And it can make sense to just see what your game plan would be if you receive notice that you're going to be examined. Next, you want to review the consumer complaints that have been filed against you. As I mentioned earlier, there's a complaints portal. You want to sign up and get access to those complaints so that you can respond to them and document your responses to them before you even hear from the CFPB. Finally, you want to review and update your compliance program. One of the first things that would take place in any examination would be a review of those policy and program materials and a review of how they're being implemented within your institution. And so you want to make sure that they've been updated to reflect recent developments, such as, for example, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and various new sanction programs that have been created in response to that. So all of this can be overwhelming, but good news, I'm a lawyer. So if you have any questions about the CFPB's examination process or the process for challenging a determination that you as a fintech company are subject to examination oversight by the CFPB, give me a call. I'd be happy to talk to you.